Lorenzo Nigro, in his 2020 paper on the excavations at Jericho, played down the implications of his discoveries. But while he demurred in that paper, this all blew open again in his 2023 paper. And that's what we'll be talking about on this episode of Ancient Egypt and the Bible. Lorenzo Nigro is a well-qualified archaeologist, but he is also an academic that has tried his best to shy away from controversy. In his 2020 paper, he claimed to have found the Late Bronze II mud brick walls of a citadel that were built over the Middle Bronze fortifications. Yet, in that paper, he did what he had done in many lectures that he has given over the succeeding years, which was to downplay the significance of his findings. The problem for him is that discovering a Late Bronze II citadel was not going to make very many people happy. On the one hand, since the publications of Kathleen Kenyon, the skeptical academic consensus has loudly claimed there was no Late Bronze city at Jericho, and therefore, the account of Joshua was a myth. The presence of a Late Bronze citadel was not going to make the consensus happy, because the timing of a Late Bronze, Early Iron Age destruction would be incredibly coincidental with Joshua, who supposedly lived during the Late Bronze 2B period. So in the 2020 paper, Nigro tried to throw the consensus a bone by agreeing with them that even though he found the remains of a Late Bronze citadel, the Joshua conquest was still a myth. On the other hand, he also had to deal with the early Exodus proponents, who have been just as vocal as the consensus scholars. Over the years since Kenyon, fundamentalists and early Exodus date supporters have tried to force the data from the Middle Bronze II destruction of City 4 into a mold that redates the findings from 1550 BC to 1406 BC. And many were satisfied by the unpublished findings of Bryant Wood that gave them plausible deniability towards Kenyon's results. The absence of a Late Bronze city gave the early daters pushback against the stronger archaeological claims of the late Exodus position. However, the existence of a Late Bronze city was undeniable in the report. So, Nigro threw the early Exodus date supporters a bone by stating that 1446 was the biblical date of the Exodus, and therefore, this Late Bronze city could not have anything to do with the biblical Exodus or conquest. Now, this attempt to make everybody happy had the expected results, which is that no one was happy, and no one was buying it. The skeptical consensus accused Nigro of being a religious apologist, which is ridiculous since he's non-religious. And likewise, the fundamentalists attacked his results, claiming that he had confused the mud brick wall with an extension of the Middle Bronze fortifications, which is archaeological nonsense. Some, like Brian Windle, even claimed that Nigro had dated the fortifications to Late Bronze 1B, 2A, so this is too early for a late Exodus, but consistent with a conquest date found in the Septuagint. Now, Nigro, for his part, in that 2020 paper, had said that he had found Late Bronze 2A walls, but didn't go into further details. And in response to these criticisms, Nigro made non-committal comments in a vain attempt to distance himself from the controversy. And if someone asked him, who had not read all the literature about the citadel, he would placate them with a vague answer that could be interpreted through a skeptical lens, because at the end of the day, they didn't matter because they hadn't read the material. On the other hand, if someone asked him a question who had read all the literature, he would comment and say, quote, "You decide," end quote. His tactic was, I'm not saying it's an LB2 citadel, but it's a late Bronze II citadel. Then, in 2022, rumors started to circulate that Nigro had submitted another paper about Jericho. And wow, there was a lot of speculation over what that paper was going to say. Skeptics were preemptively claiming that Nigro had been taken out of context in the 2020 paper, and that Nigro was going to walk back the misunderstanding surrounding the paper, and that he was going to clarify that his findings would be A, redated to late Bronze I, and B, the limits of the citadel would be restricted to the residents immediately surrounding the so-called middle building. Likewise, the fundamentalists were speculating that Nigro was going to raise the dating of the late Bronze II walls, or that Nigro was going to admit the mud brick walls were really part of the Middle Bronze fortifications and built prior to that Middle Bronze destruction. Finally, the article came out in 2023. It was entitled, es-Sultan Jericho in the Late Bronze Age, an overall reconstruction in light of the most recent research. And it was published in a Festschrift volume called Durch die Zeiten, Through the Ages. And the article was received with crickets. So, what did Nigro write in that article? Now, unlike the previous paper, this paper focused entirely on the late Bronze citadel. On page 600 of the article, Nigro makes his first overt statement with his section title, quote, Tell es-Sultan, Jericho in the Late Bronze Age, Sultan V, 1550 to 1200 BC, end quote. And that's where the bomb goes off. He stated, quote, Nevertheless, some evidence of the Late Bronze Age city were recognized by all 4 expeditions, which worked at the site from 1907 to nowadays, end quote. Pages 600 to 601. Nigro then continues, quote, The discovery of Jericho as an important political center contrasts with the almost complete absence of any reference to Jericho in the Amarna letters, which, added to the lack of Mycenaean pottery, led Garstang to the wrong conclusion that the city had been abandoned in the Late Bronze Age to A, 1400 to 1300 BC. Nevertheless, archaeological evidence shows that the occupation continued during the following stage of Late Bronze 2B, 1300 to 1200 BC, end quote, page 602. Far from walking back his original 2020 paper, Nigro not only doubled down on his original conclusion, but he was a lot more specific about the context of City 5, stating that City 5 was destroyed around 1200 BC. Nigro then continued, quote, Late Bronze 2B layers were heavily cut by Iron Age leveling operations, and this explains the scarcity of 13th century BC materials. However, on the eastern flank of Spring Hill, square H3, KM Kenyon uncovered Late Bronze 2B dwellings, and it seems clear that the, quote, middle building, end quote, was still in use in this stage. To sum up, ceramic material of both the 14th and 13th centuries BC are positively attested at Tel es-Sultan, end quote, page 602. Okay, let that sink in for a moment. Kenyon discovered Late Bronze 2B buildings with Late Bronze 2B ceramic material in an area where Nigro had not excavated. He also stated that Garstang found the same mud brick wall over the Middle Bronze 3 stone retaining structure on the western and southern slopes, trench DD, square C6, D6, and E6. But Garstang only claimed it was Late Bronze because of the poor state of the structures. Nigro then noted that Kenyon found the late bronze mud brick wall on the western, Trench 1, northern, Trench 2, and southern, Trench 3 sides of the tell, page 605. So in other words, the late bronze wall followed the middle bronze fortifications. And it appears that the late bronze city covered about 4.5 hectares of the tell, which is slightly smaller than the early bronze city. Moreover, Nigro accepted Bienkowski's late bronze 2A, early late bronze 2B dating for the so-called middle building, page 606. Nigro concludes the paper with, quote, "The analysis of the archaeological remains associated with the late Bronze Age suggests the site of Tel es-Sultan, Jericho, was a flourishing city still during the domination of the Egyptian Empire. The late Bronze II, 1400 to 1200 BC, city of Jericho, was in fact smaller than the previous Canaanite city, with a lower density in population. It was still a fortified city, but the fortifications were characterized by the reuse of most of the impressive structures of the Middle Bronze Age III, Sultan IV-C, 1600 to 1550 BC. The, quote, middle building does not preserve the monumentality of the previous Jericho palaces. The middle building is the expression of a new building typology. No more the palace of a king, but the residence of a local governor, vassal of the Egyptian Empire. In the archaeological record, the replacement of the palaces with the governor's residence is the most tangible effect of the direct Egyptian intervention on the southern Levant, end quote, page 612. In conclusion, there are 5 takeaways from Nigro's 2023 paper. 1. Late Bronze II fortifications, buildings, ceramics, and scarabs confirm the existence of Late Bronze IIB city of Jericho City 5. 2. All the expeditions since 1907 found evidence of the Late Bronze city. 3. Late Bronze IIB Jericho was an important regional center that served as an Egyptian vassal. 4. The so-called Middle Building was an administrative center built during the Late Bronze Age. And 5. Jericho City 5 lasted until around 1200 BC when it was destroyed. Take that all together, and you get an archaeological report that shows that there was a Late Bronze IIB city of Jericho that is consistent with the Joshua conquest narrative. So anyway, we hope you enjoyed this video and learned something. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you next time on Ancient Egypt and the Bible.